In this video, I'm going to show you one of my favorite methods to help you level up your trap melodies. This is part 1 of my new trap beat making masterclass, so be sure to check out the rest of the series. If you've watched any tutorials on the subject of trap melodies, you're probably familiar with the concept of starting your melody by building chords. While that is one method of making your melody, the method I'm going to show you is by starting with the top line. I'm using this method because most of the time when I have a melody in mind, it's usually an arpeggiated top line instead of a chord progression, and a top line is much easier to come up with compared to a chord progression, which is much more beginner friendly. For this video, I don't have any pre-planned melodies in mind, so I'll be making it completely from scratch. So let's jump right into it. The first thing I like to do when starting a melody is to pick a tempo and a scale. Typically, trap beats tend to have a tempo between 140 BPM and 160 BPM. I like to start by splitting the difference at 150 BPM. But once you have your melody built out, you can always speed it up or slow it down to your liking. Now with the tempo selected, I'll pick a scale. I'm going to do this by playing notes on my MIDI keyboard until I find a root note that jumps out at me. I like this note, which happens to be D. So I'm going to come over to the clip section here, enable the scale helper mode, and pick the scale of D. But keep in mind that trap usually sounds darker and more ominous, so I'm going to do a minor scale instead of major. Now you can see all of the notes in this scale are highlighted in our piano roll. If your DAW doesn't have scale helpers, I made a video on how to find the notes of any scale with a simple formula. I'll link that in the description below. Now I'm going to try to find a basic idea for my top line by playing around with some notes on my MIDI keyboard to see if I can find something that sounds good. I think some of those notes could work, so now I'm going to pencil in a 4-bar loop and see what I can come up with. And then I'm going to copy that all across. I think that sounds pretty good, but now let's duplicate it. If we just repeat this over and over, it's going to start getting repetitive. So I want to make a change in the duplicate arrangement. This usually works best at the end of the second half. This is because it helps signal the end of the bar for the listener and keeps the track moving forward. This is the rule of 8, which explains that every 4 or 8 bars, your track needs to have some type of change or addition. So let's open up the second half and make a minor change. Now I felt this was already getting repetitive just with these first 2 looping, so I went ahead and changed both parts of the second half. Now I think this sounds pretty good, and you can just stop here if you want. If you pay close attention to a lot of modern hip-hop and trap songs, many of them are very basic just like this and don't need too much. But let's layer in some chords to make it a little more full. I'm going to start by laying out some root notes and try to find a pattern that complements the top line. And I'm probably going to start with the root note of the scale, which is D. That sounds pretty good, so I'm going to duplicate that across. And now we have our completed root notes. From here, I'm going to build out some basic triads. So starting from my root notes, let's skip a note and place one on the third. And then skip the next note and place our final note one above that. If you're unfamiliar with making chords, check out my in-depth video on how to make chords and chord progressions. I'll link that in the description as well. I'm going to do this process for each one of the root notes. So I'll copy these across. And you can see that we're skipping this one, landing on the second. and we're skipping a note, but this one's up, so we need to move it down so it's in the scale. And I'm going to continue this all the way across. And that sounds like this. One thing I like to do with my chords is to highlight all the middle notes and then invert them up an octave. And you can see that that got into our melody up here, so we're just going to have to make some small tweaks to fix that. That sounded pretty good. And finally, I like to duplicate all of the root notes an octave down. This helps fill out the low end. Now our melody's starting to sound pretty good, so let's find a sound that works for a trap beat. I'm thinking some type of a synth or a bell. I think that sounds really good. Now I want to duplicate this melody again and see if I could find another sound that'll help complement this and thicken it up. This one could be good, so I'm going to play around with the sound on this. First off, I'm going to get rid of these root notes because that's going to make it way too muddy. And I think I'm going to delete the second half of the chords as well. That way we're just affecting the top. And then I'm going to duplicate this again and keep looking just in case I'm not sure about this one. I think these could all work together, so I'm going to take this one here, and I'm actually going to duplicate this up an octave. Make it even higher pitch. So I'm going to go into here, and I'm going to kind of mix as we go, because these two patches were way louder than the other, so I'm going to bring them down a tiny bit. And now I finally think I want to add some ambience, maybe a set of strings or a pad or something below it to fill everything out. This is sounding really good now, but if you want to keep going, you can also render out your melody and flip it or use it to make more textures. So now that our melody is rendered out, I like to run it through a granular synthesis plugin and try to make a texture layer. My plugin of choice is Portal, but you can use whatever you like if you have a preferred VST. Now I'm going to cycle through and see if I could find a preset that sounds good. Oh, that's pretty cool. I kind of like this one, so I'm going to re-render this and then add it as a texture. The first thing I want to do is cut out a lot of that low end because it's going to make everything way too muddy. I might even boost up the highs on this a little bit just to give it a little more flavor. Yeah, I think that sounds way better. So in a sense, what we did is we took our melody that we made from scratch and we ran it through some processing and turned it into a completely different texture. Once layering these together, you can see that it works really well with the original melody because it is the melody. So all the notes are in key and it works really, really well. Finally, one thing you could do on your texture render is play with the pitch. So I'm going to pitch this up and see if it sounds any different. think I like how it sounds pitched up, but it's way louder now, so I'm going to pull the volume down quite a bit. So at -15, I think that sounds pretty good, and you can tell that it just gives you a little twinkle in your ears, but it's not overpowering. And now finally, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate our melody, and then we're going to try to flip it. I like to start by reversing it and see what it sounds like because it usually immediately makes the sample more aggressive and sounding more like trap. That's sounding pretty cool, but let's try chopping it up to make a whole new melody. Take a second to listen through and find some parts that sound good, then chop and piece them together. I like this. So let's start here. Duplicate that. And now we've chopped that up and it sounds like this. This is sounding really cool also, and if you end up wanting to do any processing to your flip, you can add whatever plugins or effects you'd like. I know we've gone through a lot in this video, but if you're still here and you followed along, you now have 2 different melodies and a texture. You can use either one for your beat, or you can use both of them. You can use the main melody that we made, and then use the flipped sample for a bridge or a verse. And since our melody is done, it's time to make the drums for our beat. So click here to move on to the next section of the Trap for Beginners series.